There's a special kind of sin in this world, the kind where grown men decide a young woman's fear is an acceptable price for their own survival. She came out of the tall river grass like something chased out of hell itself, bare feet bleeding, knees shaking, skin bruised dark and fresh. She staggered toward the water's edge as if the river was the last place left that hadn't judged her yet. Her hair was tangled and wet with sweat. Her breath came in sharp, broken gasps, and her eyes didn't look at the land, or the sky, or the old rancher standing there. Her eyes looked past him, like she was still running even after her legs had given out. Elias Mercer had been filling his horse's canteen at the Arkansas River just outside Dodge City, doing what a man his age did best, minding his business and keeping his head down. Folks called him Eli. He was 56, shoulders stiff from years of sun and work, hands scarred from rope burns and winter steel. He'd seen drunks crawl out of town, thieves limp away from bad deals, and men die quieter than they deserved. But he'd never seen fear move like that. The girl stopped 3 steps away from him, clutching a torn piece of cloth against her chest like it was the only thing keeping her together. Her skin was marked, not by accidents, but by hands that had taken their time. Her wrists were raw, red circles clear enough to tell their own story. She tried to speak once, failed, swallowed hard, then blurted out the first truth that came with breath. "Help me. He's coming." Her eyes darted to the tree line, and her voice cracked like it didn't belong to her anymore. "I need a child." The words landed wrong. Not desperate in the way beggars sound desperate. Not confused in the way drunks get confused. It sounded rehearsed, drilled into her by fear, like a sentence learned to survive, like somebody had forced her to practice it until it became a key, like those words were the only thing between her and a worse kind of punishment. Eli froze, his hand still on the canteen strap, his horse snorting softly behind him. For a long second, the only sound was water sliding past the rocks and the girl's uneven breathing. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask where she came from. He didn't ask why, because any man who'd lived long enough out here knew that questions came after safety, not before. He stepped closer, slow and careful, like he might spook her if he moved wrong. She flinched anyway, not from his hand, but from the idea of one. That was when he saw the full truth written on her body, the bruises in places no fall could explain, the way she hunched inward as if trying to disappear inside herself. Eli took off his shirt without a word and held it out. She stared at it like it might be a trick. Then her fingers closed around the fabric, tight enough to turn her knuckles white. As she pulled it on, her knees buckled, and she would have gone down into the mud if Eli hadn't caught her. She was lighter than she should have been, bones sharp under skin, trembling like a colt left too long in a storm. Up close, he could see how young she really was, no more than 22, too young to carry that kind of terror. Her lips moved again, quieter this time, almost to herself. "I need a child." Eli felt something old and dangerous tighten in his chest. Not anger yet, something colder, the kind of feeling that came when you realized the world had crossed a line it couldn't uncross. He checked her injuries the way a rancher checked a wounded animal, respectful, efficient, never taken more than he had to. She didn't resist, but she didn't relax either. Her eyes kept snapping toward the tree line, toward the bend in the trail, toward every sound that didn't belong. Someone was coming. Or someone had already promised they would. Eli lifted her onto his horse, steadying her with one arm while she clutched his shirt with the other, like it was an anchor. As they rode away from the river, her head dropped against his shoulder, her breath shallow and fast. Just before she slipped into darkness, she whispered 2 broken words that changed everything. "My husband." Eli didn't look back at the river. He didn't need to. He knew that whatever had driven her into that water had teeth, and it wasn't done hunting. Quick note, so we keep this honest. This story is gathered and retold from old accounts, with a few details adjusted to sharpen the lesson and protect dignity. All visuals are AI made to match the mood and help you feel the moment. If you're not in the headspace for a heavy frontier tale tonight, take care of yourself first. But if you're still here, drop a comment because I want to know you're listening. And I've got more stories like this waiting in the dust. because here's what most folks miss about that river moment. Clara wasn't asking for comfort. She was trying to repeat the rule that kept her alive. Eli could see it in the way she scanned the tree line, in the way her hand shook, even when he didn't move. A person doesn't learn a sentence like that from nowhere. Somebody taught it to her, the same way a man teaches a horse to fear a whip. And if Eli was wrong about her, if this was some kind of trap, he could lose his ranch, his name, maybe even his life. But if he was right, and he rode away, then he'd be leaving a young woman to be claimed like property. Out here, that choice tells you who you are. As Eli guided his horse toward his ranch, the girl's grip tightened in her sleep. Not around him, around the shirt. Like it was proof that for the first time in days, someone hadn't asked her for something in return. Eli found himself stuck on one question he couldn't shake. What kind of man makes a young woman believe that giving birth is the only way she's allowed to live? And what happens when she finally runs into someone who refuses to believe that lie? Eli didn't ride fast on the way back to the ranch, not because he wasn't worried, but because he'd learned the hard way that fear only gets louder when you let it set the pace. The girl drifted in and out against his shoulder, sometimes murmuring words that didn't quite connect. Sometimes falling so still he had to check if she was breathing. When they reached the ranch, the sun was already sliding lower, turning the dust in the yard gold. Eli lifted her down carefully and carried her inside, setting her on the edge of the bed like she might shatter if handled wrong. He brought water first, then a clean cloth, then he stepped back, not because he didn't care, because care without respect turns into another kind of harm. For a while, she didn't speak at all. She stared at the wall, fingers clenched in the fabric of his shirt, breathing slow but tight. Then, without warning, her eyes focused, clearer, present. "My name's Clara," she said softly. The way she said it made Eli stop what he was doing. Not hopeful, just tired. He nodded and told her his name, then went back to tending the kettle like this was any other afternoon. That seemed to calm her. In those quiet minutes, Clara looked almost normal. Young, too young to carry what she was carrying. She asked where she was. She asked if anyone had followed them. She asked how far Dodge City was. Then her gaze drifted, and something in her face folded inward. Her hands started shaking. Her breath went shallow again. "I need a child," she whispered, staring at the floor like it might open up. Eli didn't interrupt. He waited. He'd raised horses long enough to know that panic burns itself out if you don't fight it. When it passed, Clara looked ashamed, like she'd broken something just by speaking. That was when Eli understood. She wasn't mad. She was fractured. Like glass dropped once too hard and never put back together right. Over the next hour, pieces came out. Not in order. Not clean. Sometimes she spoke clearly, naming places along the Santa Fe Trail, talking about her father's farm, the dry summers, the way debt crept in slow. Other times, she curled into herself, repeating phrases like they were rules she'd memorized to stay alive. That was when Eli learned about Silas Crow. Not all at once, just enough to feel the weight of the name. Silas was a man who loaned money and collected people. A man who smiled when witnesses were around and showed his real hands when they weren't. Claire's father had owed him more than money. He'd owed him time. And time was something Silas never forgave. When Clara spoke of her father, her voice steadied. When she spoke of Silas, her hands shook. She said Silas had told her that women like her didn't get to choose, that safety was earned, that a child would make things right, that once she gave him one, everything would settle. Eli stared at the stove, jaw tight. He'd heard plenty of lies in his life, but that one was built to break a person. Claire said she'd tried to run once before, said she'd been dragged back by the arm, said that after that, Silas stopped pretending. She didn't describe it. She didn't have to. Eli saw enough in the way she pulled away when he moved too fast, in the way she flinched at footsteps outside. When the truth got too close, her mind slipped. That was when the words came back. "I need a child," like a lock clicking shut, like a door closing to keep something worse out. Eli didn't hover. He fixed the loose hinge on the back door, checked the corral latch, and laid fresh water for the horse like doing chores could keep evil outside the fence. Then he cleaned his rifle slow, not eager, just prepared. The way an old man handles a problem he can't pray away. Eli went out to the porch and sat down hard. The ranch creaked the way it always did. Familiar sounds trying to pretend this was an ordinary day. It wasn't. He thought about the kind of man who could do that to a young woman. Then he thought about the kind of man who could look away. He didn't like either answer. When he went back inside, Clara was sitting up straighter, calmer. She asked if she could wash up. He showed her where the basin was and left her alone. When she came back, wrapped in a clean blanket, she looked more like herself than she had since the river. That was when she said something that made Eli's stomach drop. "He's gonna come," she said. Not dramatic, not scared, just certain. Eli nodded. He didn't argue. Men like Silas didn't lose property and walk away. As the sun slipped lower, Eli checked his rifle, then set it aside. He didn't want to be the first man to bring violence to his own door, but he wasn't going to pretend it wouldn't come. Clara watched him quietly, eyes following every movement. In that moment, she looked less like a frightened girl and more like someone measuring whether a place was safe enough to believe in. Before night fully settled in, Eli poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. He didn't promise anything. He didn't say he'd fix it. He just told her this. As long as she was under his roof, no one was taking her without a fight. Something loosened in her shoulders at that. Not relief. Permission. If this story's got you in its grip, do me a small favor and subscribe. Not because it helps me, though it does, but because these stories keep finding people who need them, and I don't want you to miss the next one. And take a moment right now, maybe pour yourself some tea or coffee, settle back, and tell me in the comments what time it is where you are and where you're listening from. Because the next part of this story is where the past comes knocking and the choices get a whole lot harder. Night didn't fall all at once. It crept in slow, like it was taking its time to see what kind of trouble lived on this ranch. The wind shifted after sundown, carrying the smell of dust and dry grass, the kind of smell that usually meant nothing at all. Tonight it meant someone was coming. Eli felt it before he heard it. A pressure in the chest, the kind that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with experience. He didn't reach for his rifle. Not yet. Men who lived long out here learned when to hold steel and when to hold their ground. Clara sat near the table, wrapped in the blanket. Quiet again. Too quiet. She hadn't asked any more questions. She just listened. When the sound finally came, it wasn't a shout or a gunshot, and it was a horse, walking up slow. Hooves placed careful, like the rider didn't want to spook anything. That told Eli everything he needed to know. This wasn't a man coming to talk. This was a man coming to take. The horse stopped just outside the fence line. A voice followed, calm and polite, the kind that practiced sounding reasonable. Clara stiffened so fast it was like someone had pulled a rope tight inside her. Eli stood up and stepped onto the porch. The man sitting on the horse smiled when he saw him. Not a friendly smile, a measured one. Silas Crow looked like trouble that had learned how to dress itself. Clean shirt, good boots, eyes that didn't blink often enough. He tipped his hat, slow and respectful, like he was visiting an old friend. He spoke Clara's name like it belonged to him. Eli didn't answer right away. He leaned against the post and let the silence stretch. Silence made liars nervous. Silas didn't look nervous. He talked about misunderstanding, about a wife who'd had an episode, about a man who meant well but didn't know the whole story. Clara took one step back inside. Eli felt that movement behind him and something hardened in his spine. "This is my land," Eli said. "You're not welcome." "Right on." Silas's smile thinned. He said things like lawful and rightful. He said Clara was his. That was when she made a sound, not a scream, more like a breath pulled too tight. Eli shifted just enough to block her from view. Silas noticed. Men like him always noticed. He nudged his horse forward, crossing the fence line without asking. That was the mistake. Eli didn't draw first. He stepped in, grabbed the reins, and told Silas to leave. Silas laughed, soft and surprised, like he couldn't believe an old rancher was touching what belonged to him. He reached down. Eli moved. The fight wasn't pretty. It wasn't fast. It was two grown men in dirt and dust, one fighting for control, the other fighting because there was no other choice. Silas was stronger, younger, but Eli was heavier with years, with work, with the kind of strength that didn't show until it had to. They hit the ground hard. Boots scraped, dust filled the air. Silas got a good blow in, enough to rattle Eli's teeth and light his head up bright. Eli answered with a grip on Silas's wrist that made him drop what he was reaching for. The sound of metal hitting dirt ended the argument. Eli kicked the gun away and shoved Silas back towards his horse. He didn't threaten. He didn't brag. He just stood there, breathing hard. Eyes locked on Silas's for a moment. Something real flashed across Silas's face. Not fear. Calculation. He backed off but straightened his shirt and mounted up again. Before he turned, he said one thing that stuck. He said he didn't need to fight this way. He said there were men in town who would be very interested to hear about a runaway wife and an old rancher keeping her. Then he rode off slow, like he'd already won something. Eli watched the dust settle before going back inside. Clara was standing now, hands clenched at her sides. Her face had gone pale, but her eyes were sharp. She asked if he was gone. Eli nodded. She sat down like her legs had finally remembered they were tired. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Eli poured water and set it in front of her. He told her Silas would be back. Not like that. Not alone. Clara nodded. She said she knew. She said he'd promised her once that if she ever ran, he wouldn't chase. He'd collect. That was when Eli understood the shape of what was coming. This wasn't going to stay on the ranch. This was headed straight for Dodge City, straight into paper and badges and men who sold justice by the inch. Eli went to the window and looked out at the dark. He'd lived his life avoiding town trouble, avoiding lawmen, avoiding anyone who thought they could tell him how to live. But some nights made the choice for you. Behind him. Clara spoke again, steadier than before. She said he knew people. She said he'd done this before. Eli didn't answer, because the truth was heavier than words. Silas hadn't come to take Clara. He'd come to mark territory. And now that he'd been challenged, he was going to use the law like a weapon. Eli turned back to her and said one thing. Tomorrow, they were going into town. Clara swallowed hard. She nodded anyway. That thought sat heavy with Eli. When a man who hurts people stops using his fists and starts using paper, the law often listens to him first. Morning came in hot and dry, the kind that promised trouble before noon. Eli didn't saddle the horse like he was going to town for supplies. He saddled it like a man riding into something he couldn't turn back from. Clara sat straight in the saddle beside him, eyes forward, jaw tight. She looked calmer than the night before, but Eli had learned by now that calm didn't always mean safe. Sometimes it just meant the storm was holding its breath. Dodge City rose out of the dust the same way it always did. Half law, half appetite. Men stood around storefronts pretending not to watch. Women paused mid-step when they saw Clara's face. Not because she looked wild, because she looked like someone who had been pushed too far and hadn't fallen apart yet. Eli took her straight to the doctor, not because he trusted the man, because paper mattered in town. The doctor didn't ask many questions, just nodded as he examined the bruises, the marks on her wrist, the stiffness in her walk. He wrote things down. That was the important part. When they stepped back into the street, Eli felt the shift. The watching got heavier. Too many eyes. Too quiet. Eli had seen that kind of quiet before. It was the quiet that shows up right before a man gets framed. People weren't staring at Clara because she looked strange. They were staring because they could smell a scandal coming. And Dodge City loved a scandal more than it loved the truth. Clara took one wrong breath and